Hello everyone, this is part 2 of What If Naruto Escapes Konoha to Rebuild His Life, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. The next morning, Naruto woke up at 3 a.m. He carefully and quietly packed his few possessions into a small duffel bag Tazuna had given him to keep his clothes in. He zipped it up and crept downstairs. He left his note sitting on the kitchen table, where Tazuna would undoubtedly find it when he came down for his morning tea. Saying a silent goodbye to the house and the people who lived there, he walked out of the house, closing the door behind him. Kubakiri Haucho was, as always, exactly where Naruto had left it on the roof. Naruto had started to feel more comfortable with the sword nearby and felt nervous when it wasn't within his range of perception. Naruto stood atop the house and looked around at his surroundings. He imagined all the sleeping citizens of Wave Country, completely oblivious to the one who would be leaving them tonight. Naruto jumped down from the roof and started to run. He ran out of the city into the forest much as he had run from another city but a short month ago. But there was a difference. As he had fled Konoha, he had been plagued by memories of the past. But this time, as he left the still sleeping port city behind him, his thoughts were on the future. As the morning plodded on, Naruto continued to run through the forest. He was now in Fire Country, and probably would be for quite some time. It was the only direct land route from Wave to Sound and Naruto wasn't good with ships. Going the most direct way would take him within 40 miles of Konoha, but Naruto wasn't prepared to be that way yet, so he had planned a slightly out-of-the-way route that would keep him a safe distance away. As the sun rose towards the peak of its path and noon approached, Naruto realized he'd been stalling long enough. After all, it had been hours since he had seen any signs of human life. Stealing his resolve, he set down his bag and sword on the ground near a particularly tall tree and ran another minute through the forest. Sweaty and out of breath, but by no means out of stamina, Naruto sought to calm himself. He was about to attempt an experimental jutsu, and wanted to at least be calm so he didn't make any mistakes. He closed his eyes and calmed his spirit. His eyes shot open and in one fluid motion, he bit his thumb and streaked a line of B down the seal on his belly. He moved his hands faster than the normal human eye could track. There were 37 hand seals. He finished on the dragon's seal, and called out to the empty forest. Shiki Fujin Kai. He found himself in the familiar landscape of his cave-like mind. He had been expecting this, but it unnerved him nonetheless, particularly considering what he was expecting at the end of the tunnel. He walked into the large room that held the Kyuubi's cage. The jutsu had worked and he had used enough chakra. The evidence of this was that it was flying around the room, forming a swirling vortex of blue energy, and as he watched, the seal holding Kyuubi in his cage started to glow and stretch and the great iron doors started to open. "What are you doing, brat?" Kyuubi's voice called, sounding as confused as Naruto had ever heard Kyuubi sound. The seal stretched more and more and the gates opened wider and wider. The demon figured he had to be suffering some kind of mental breakdown, but wasn't willing to let opportunity escape. As soon as the gates were open enough, Kyuubi stuck a paw through the gap and sent it hurling towards Naruto, hoping to crush his mind and take over the body. Naruto saw the huge clawed appendage coming towards him and it took every ounce of his willpower to wait as long as he did. As the claw was fractions of a second away from making his body into a demon puppet, Naruto released the jutsu. The blue chakra in the room immediately vanished. The seal lost its glow and the gates shut, cleanly severing the front right leg of the Kyuubi, which quickly disintegrated into a wave of red chakra that washed over him. Naruto was sucked from his mind world with the screams of the demon following him. Naruto awoke in the real world to discover a new meaning for the word, paran. It felt like every muscle and bone in his body was both expanding and contracting at the same time as a hurricane of red chakra tore apart the surrounding area of forest. After about a minute, the chakra vanished until Naruto was just left lying on the grass, staring at clouds. He slowly drifted off to sleep thinking, for a demon thousands of years old, that fox is pretty stupid. Naruto awoke to find the sun rising, and realized he had slept for 18 hours. He eagerly examined his body, and was disappointed when he saw that the changes had been minor. He had gained a bit of muscle mass, and grown maybe 3 inches. He also molded some chakra and found that he had gained some extra reserves of that as well. Naruto maintained his slightly depressed state all the way to the location of his stash. Naruto had figured some time ago that channeling insane amounts of Kyuubi's chakra might enhance his body, but he had needed a way to get that much. It was then that he had come upon the idea of the Shikifujin Kai. It had stood to reason that since jutsus like the Shadow Bind could be broken with raw chakra, it would also be possible to, if temporarily, bend the seal, and trick the Kyuubi exactly as he had done. Many months of research later, Naruto had ditched the idea. He had realized that taking power from the Kyuubi might very well give the villagers the excuse they needed to K him. In retrospect, he had been right to ditch the jutsu then, but he was glad he had done the research. All in all, his experimental jutsu was a success. He was sure Kyuubi would never fall for the same trick again, but his eye change alone was worth it. Eye color was mostly impossible to change without genjutsu, so he might even be able to bluff his way out of a situation where he had already been recognized. Satisfied and refreshed from his long nap, Naruto checked his map and compass before bounding off through the forest. Meanwhile, in Konoha, the 5th Hokage lay on her desk, with her eyes staring blankly off into empty space. Her face was soaked with tears, as was the letter she clutched desperately in her right hand. She had sent a squad of Anbu to the sand the day before, despite the protest of the whole council, and had spent every moment since dreading their report. She refused to believe that Naruto was D by his own hand. He had always had such an unbreakable spirit, but as the days passed, soon had started to remember things. Images of him being jeered at by shopkeepers, hit by children throwing rotten fruit, screamed at by parents for asking to play with their child. All these things had also been part of Naruto's past. And Tsunade herself wasn't sure if she could handle that kind of treatment for 13 years. She had been crying for 2 days, but with these thoughts and memories haunting her, she started to convert her sadness to anger. However she looked at it, this whole mess was Orochimaru's fault. He had been the one to steal Sasuke from the village and shatter Naruto's frail trust. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. Until she decided that if those Anbu came back confirming the death of her third precious person, she would burn the sound to the ground if she had to do it with her own 2 hands. Far away, a green necklace lay forgotten in the bottom of Naruto's duffel bag. Naruto sat in the forest rubbing his feet. His boots were lying next to him on the forest floor and he glared menacingly at them. He had only been running a couple hours when his feet had started to sting, and a short time later he couldn't run anymore. He quickly discovered the problem. After bathing in demonic chakra, his feet had gotten larger. Not by any significant amount, only a few fractions of an inch, but it was enough to make his boots pinch. Naruto had expected a slight body size increase, he just hadn't accounted for all the problems it would cause. This, he decided, was the less glamorous side of transformation jutsus. A quick once-over had also shown that he would need to have the hems on his pants let out as they hung a good inch and a bit above his ankles, showing off skin. He had a sudden moment of pity for Kimimaro. The poor guy must have spent all his money on fixing holes in his clothing. This line of thought was amusing, but didn't help Naruto decide what to do about his boots. He was 70 miles from the nearest town. He continued to rub his foot, trying to get the B circulation again. After 10 minutes or so, an idea finally came to him. He took a kunai out of his holster and started hacking at one of his boots. In 3 minutes, he had a usable if not particularly good-looking pair of what he thought of as ninja sandals. He had really just sewn the top off his boots and used the extra material to tie his feet into the bottoms. Now again mobile, Naruto got to his feet, picked up his bag and sword and started off through the forest. Some 50 miles north of Naruto's current position, Uchiha Itachi was shopping for Pocky. He stood among the many flavors and tried vainly to decide. It was a little-known fact that the most deadly Nukenin in Konoha history had an obsession with the chocolatey snack. He had eaten 3 packs a day for years and had only stopped eating them in combat when a group of grass Junin had burst out laughing as he happily munched. Needless to say, he continued to munch as he ripped them to shreds, but after that decided to keep eating and fighting separate. He had abstained from his Akatsuki cloak today and had a pencil carefully tucked behind his ear. He and his partner had decided long ago that Itachi was the one who handled shopping and Kisum was the one who managed their money. That way, Itachi got what he wanted and his partner could decide how much of it he got. His pocky limit for the week was 15 boxes. He sat down in the aisle and let his eyes roam over the various shelves. He had to choose carefully, but he was patient, and he knew that the answers would come to him in time. Naruto looked at the sun. He had made good progress. He was hoping to get out of Fire Country as fast as he could and hadn't even stopped to get new shoes in the last town he had passed through, though this could also be partly attributed to the fact that he didn't want anyone to see him. He continued to run and pondered his high endurance. Weeks of training all morning and gunning all afternoon had given him a substantial boost to his stamina, and he was managing the weight of Kubikiri Haucho better every day. Proof of this was that he had been running most of the morning and still had some energy left. Stopping at the base of a tree for a short breather, Naruto tried to decide what he would actually do when he arrived at the village of the hidden sound. He had serious doubts about just walking up to the gates knocking. He had no intention of joining the sound, so he would need to find another way in, and knowing Orochimaru, he would have to give something up in exchange for what he wanted. He continued to ponder, completely unaware of the presence far above him in the treetops. Hoshigaki Kisum stared down at the oblivious boy. This was undoubtedly the source of the weird chakra surge Samehada had picked up the day before, but to find him with Kubikiri Haucho. Kisum would have normally immediately killed anyone who would dare take one of the 7 mist Tenkan as his own, but Samehada had given some very odd results about his chakra. Kisum never forgot the feel of a person's chakra. Ever. This boy, alone in the wilderness, with a new forehead protector, looking completely different and carrying Azusa's sword was most definitely the Kyuubi brat. Kisum could immediately tell had left his village. If not for his chakra, he would never have recognized the boy. He tried to think of what could draw him out here. The only thing in the direction he was traveling was hidden sound. He looked at the sword again and his eyes widened. The boy must have gotten the sword recently. Kisum had made a note to know where it was and last he had heard it was marking the demon's grave. It made perfect sense. The sword was in need of repair, and so the brat would obviously need someone to fix it. A plan was starting to form in Kisum's mind, but for it to work, the boy would have to know how to handle his weapon. He glanced at the sun. Considering the distance to the store and the 15 box of Pocky limit, Kisum figured he had about 2 hours before Itachi got back. Plenty of time. His hands flashed through seals and he whispered, Kirigakure no Jutsu. Naruto was just getting ready to start on his way again when he noticed the mist starting to fill the area. Immediately dropping his bag, he dove into the bushes, uncovering Kubikiri as he ran through the brush. The mist grew thicker and Naruto jumped into a tree to try to get a better view of the area. He was trying to figure out who could be doing this, and the only answer he could come up with was Mist Hunter Nin, but that made no sense. His thoughts were quickly interrupted as his instincts screamed at him. He leapt off the branch right as it exploded. 2 phantoms did a dance of destruction through the forest. A slight disturbance in the mist would be the only warning, and they'd be at each other, exchanging blows faster than a normal human eye could follow, before both vanishing back into the mist. The air was silent. Neither fighter made a sound as they silently stalked one another. Both knew there was no time for attempting other jutsus. The second one of them was off guard, the other would strike. Still somewhere far away, Itachi was reaching for his 9th box of Pocky when he quickly withdrew his hand. He couldn't allow himself to be hasty in his choice. Naruto cursed silently as he looked out into the impenetrable fog. He knew he had the disadvantage. Kisum had a better understanding of Kirigakure no Jutsu, and so Naruto was fighting blind on pure instinct. And then there was the small issue of Kisum being a Junin. He was using every ounce of strength and flexibility he had just to avoid Samehada. But then again, he shouldn't be able to avoid Samehada at all. He ran through the forest trying to figure this out. Kisum was holding back, he knew it, but why? And for that matter, why was the Shark Man here in the first place? Naruto had no more time for thought as Samehada came hurling out of the mist. He jumped over where he knew Kisum was standing and twisted in midair, bringing Kubikiri around to block the inevitable follow-up strike. But it never came. Realizing he'd been tricked, Naruto tried to compensate, but he was off balance and landed poorly. The last thing he felt was an impact on his left arm. The mist slowly cleared as Kisum looked thoughtfully at the unconscious boy. The fight had taken less than 2 minutes, and in that time, Naruto had demonstrated that he had absolutely no idea how to use his sword, and that was exactly why Kisame had been so impressed. The brat had held him at bay for 2 minutes, and even with Kisame holding back more than 2/3 of his power, that was still quite a feat. Sighing, he picked up the boy and slung him over his shoulder before stooping to pick up Kubikiri. Itachi wasn't going to be happy about this, so Kisame had a feeling that he would have to double next week's Pocky budget. Naruto's first thought as he started to come around was that he must be in heaven, because his nose was full of the smell of fresh ramen. Just as he was opening his eyes, however, the ramen was taken away. "Wake up, brat," Kisame said impatiently, "we need to have a little talk before Itachi gets back." Naruto was suddenly fully awake and examining his surroundings. He was relieved to see both Kubikiri and his bag in good condition. He was less pleased, however, with being tied to a tree and towered over by an annoying shark man. He would later think up many things he could have said at this moment, but settled for the first thing that came to mind. "Why aren't I d?" Naruto asked. Kisame didn't even miss a beat. "Because I need to ask you some things," he replied. Naruto blinked. He supposed that made sense. "Ask away." Kisame started simple. He grabbed Kubikiri and held it out in front of Naruto. "Where did you get this?" Naruto went over his options, and decided this was another case where his "don't lie to people who can kick your ass" theory applied. See chapter point 3. He also realized that explaining where he got the sword would only make sense if he explained why he had left Konoha. One thing led to another, and Naruto spent the next 10 minutes essentially summarizing everything that had transpired in the last month and a bit. Kisame had been silent the whole time, but was ecstatic. This would be perfect. The situation couldn't have worked out better if some had planned it. Author twiddles his thumbs innocently. "Tell you what," Kisame said, "I'll give you some help with your atrocious sword skills and help you get into Hidden Sound to find Hoshigaki Kiran, and all I want in return is for you to help me out with something." Naruto started to say something, then stopped as he noticed Kisame's smirk and reprocessed what he had just said. "Oh," was the most intelligent reply Naruto could come up with. "So," Kisame started again, "do we have a deal, brat?" Naruto realized that even if he hadn't needed help getting into sound, he really didn't have a choice in the matter seeing as how he was tied to a tree and helpless. He nodded slowly. "Good," Kisame said with a grin. He see Naruto's bindings at set the bowl of ramen in front of the ravenous boy. "Eat quick, brat," Kisame called as he tossed Naruto some chopsticks. Itachi left the store and headed back to camp satisfied. It had taken him 3 hours and 43 minutes, but he had decided on what flavors he wanted. He was munching on a stick of white chocolate cream, when he came upon the scene of a young boy with red eyes practicing with a giant sword in the middle of his camp. Itachi pulled out his box of Pocky and carefully read the ingredients, but nothing seemed suspicious. He looked again, the boy was still there, he activated his Sharingan, and the boy was still there. He was about to introduce one of his kunai to the boy's neck when he felt Kisame land beside him. He turned and glared at his partner. "Explain." Kisame then once again summarized the summary Naruto had given him just a few minutes before, finishing the explanation with, "So he can get what he wants from my brother and we get a reliable agent in the Hidden Sound. Everyone leaves happy." Itachi thought for a moment. As much as he hated to admit it, and he most definitely hated to admit it, Kisame had a point. It was rare, but not unheard of for Akatsuki to work with other missing nins, and this boy might save them a lot of trouble. Every 18 months, Kisame and Itachi took a break from Akatsuki work to go visit Hoshigaki Kiran, Kisame's brother. Kisame went to get his sword checked and fixed, and Itachi just went because it was a break from working all the time. At the end of every visit, they would agree on where they would meet the next time. Unfortunately, Mist Hunters had forced Kiran to flee from the agreed location and seek sanctuary in the Hidden Sound. This posed a slight problem, as it was unlikely Orochimaru would let the two strongest members of the Akatsuki 9 just waltz into his village for a quick visit with his new best weaponsmith. They had been planning on getting a sound Junin to deliver a message for them. Find a squad and KO all the members but one, then threaten the last one until he did what they wanted. This had worked before, but was messy and left a trail. Kisame actually cared about his brother and had been concerned that this method might put him in danger. Kisame had suspected that Naruto might be looking for his brother as soon as he saw Kubikiri Haucho, and had decided that he would be a far better agent. First of all, Naruto had no reason, or, less of a reason, to betray them. Second of all, Naruto needed the help of Kisame and his brother if he ever wanted to be more than an amateur with a beat-up sword. Thirdly, he had a valid reason to be in the Sound Village and to talk to Kiran. The final, and perhaps greatest advantage was that Fushiku Naruto didn't exist. No matter how deep they delved or how far they searched, no one would be able to find any trace of anyone with his name or description. He had no home village, no friends, no past. Kisame went over all this, and the only thing that stopped Itachi from immediately agreeing was that this boy had been the target of a failed mission, and Itachi hated to fail missions. The council had been annoyed with them for weeks. Itachi's internal war finally ended with him agreeing to work with the brat. The boy was, after all, now a missing nin, and if they didn't help each other out once in a while, the villagers would kill them of one by one until no one would have the courage to leave. The other, and far more important reason was that the two Akatsuki really needed someone's help, but Itachi would never admit that to himself. Naruto had known the two were somewhere nearby, but that didn't stop him from jumping slightly as two forms emerged from the forest. He blinked. The last time they had met, Naruto had been overcome by Itachi's sheer aura of power. Turned out that effect was diminished slightly when he was without his cloak and carrying shopping bags. Now, instead of looking like an incarnation of death, he just looked like an older version of Sasuke with a Pocky addiction. Dinner that evening was awkward at first. This was primarily due to the fact that shortly after sitting down, Naruto came to a startling realization. S-class missing nins were people. It had come as the greatest shock of his life when Itachi had set up a campfire and started to fry some meat in a pan. Their food was simple, noodles and fried chicken, but Itachi turned out to be a very good cook. Naruto was surprised again when the two Akatsuki started to chat about pointless non-death related things. Contrary to what he might have thought, the older Uchiha was far more talkative than his younger brother had been. After a while, Naruto found himself getting used to the idle way the two deadly shinobi discussed the next day's meals between bites of chicken. He even started to add the occasional comment to their conversation. Supper was quickly finished and the topic of discussion turned to their task. Naruto now actively joined in. Kisame was tired of watching his brother run, but the only way to get the hunters off his trail was if they believed he was D. So their task was twofold. They had to get Kiran out of the hidden village of Sound undetected, and make it look as if he had D in a way such that the body could never be recovered. If so much as a single sighting of Kisame or Itachi were made, the plan would be blown, as everyone would suspect a plot. Unfortunately, Kiran's connection to members of Akatsuki was far better known in the world of shinobi than it was in the world of metalworkers. That meant that everything would hinge on Naruto. They decided he would infiltrate the villagers who he was, a young man looking to get his sword repaired. Unlike most hidden village leaders, Orochimaru allowed Nukanons to both live in and visit his village. Some took missions, others didn't, but Orochimaru figured that they would help if the village were attacked. It was like having a free defense force, people fighting to protect the Sound not because they were paid to, but because it was the only place that would accept them. It was sad and brilliant at the same time. It was decided that Naruto would pose as a child of one of the missed nin who had run away with Zabuza. He would claim that his father had been killed recently. This story, combined with a few bribes, would allow him to enter the village with minimal attention. The three continued to plan long into the night, unaware that somewhere far away, another plan was in the making. Gaara stood before the Hokage with his siblings, giving his report. Surrounding him were the few in the village interested in Naruto's fate. He had been speaking for just over an hour, and from his first word he had every ounce of attention in that room focused on him. He wove a tale of sadness and depression so dark it tore at the heartstrings of even the most cold-hearted Junin. It was a tale of a broken boy who had come to see the only other person on the planet like him before he threw his life into the sands of the desert. He described the conversation he had had with Naruto in minute detail, every word, every facial expression, and every gesture. It was all, of course, a complete lie. Finally, he finished with, "Then I saw his form slowly vanish into the desert." Gaara took a step back, very proud of himself. He wouldn't doubt that he had just given the best angsty speech anyone in the room had ever heard. Though he admitted that watching Rock Lee sob and hug his teacher for an hour had unnerved him a little bit. It had only been moments after the Anbu arrived at his door that he realized what Naruto had done. He had wondered the whole way here whether he would be able to lie to the Hokage herself. Then he had seen the parties in the streets. Bars offering free liquor, huge signs waving in the wind reading, ding, dong, the demon's D. Most of Konoha was celebrating. A few people were indifferent, and here, in this room with him, were the only ones who felt even a tinge of sadness at the thought of Naruto being D. His eyes roamed around the room. The Hokage had started to cry silently halfway through his story and the man called Jiraiya was holding her hand. The elder Hyuga child had his eyes tightly shut was evidently trying to hold his emotions in check while his younger sister, or cousin, Gaara wasn't sure, clung to him, sobbing. Noticeably missing were Naruto's remaining teammate and teacher. Gaara glared. How dare these people think they had the right to be sad? Where did they think they had been when Naruto had needed them? The people of this village didn't deserve the truth. Gaara continued to be angry even after the Hokage composed herself and thanked him. It was Orochimaru's fault. It followed in Tsunade's mind that Sasuke had left because of Orochimaru, and Naruto she had trouble even thinking it himself because Sasuke had left, therefore, it was Orochimaru's fault. Tsunade stood and looked at the few gathered before her. There has been, she declared, far too much sadness in this village. So much that it will be many years before life gets back to normal. But in this time, I ask you to be strong, and help me to eliminate the source of this sadness. Tsunade her fist into her desk, shattering it. I want every available shinobi called in from whatever mission they're on, from the Anbu to the Genin, I want them all here. She turned to Shizune, get our strategists working on a plan. 1 month from now, we will crush Orochimaru and his village of sound, and end this circle of sadness forever. The Hokage spun and stormed out of the room, leaving a stunned audience behind her. Shikamaru sighed, troublesome. Back in the forest, Naruto lay sleeping silently near the now extinguished campfire. Deeper in the woods, Itachi and Kisame were washing their clothes in the river by moonlight. They were silent for the first few moments, each having things to contemplate. Itachi looked at his partner and decided he needed to break the silence. Don't even start thinking about it, Kisame. The council would never allow us to have a dependent, he would just slow us down. Kisame growled slightly as he tried to get a sweat stain out of his shirt. I'm perfectly aware of that, but looking at him is a lot like looking into the past, isn't it, Itachi? Itachi could only nod. He remembered well what it was like during his first year as a missing nin. It had been hard, and he had been a Junin when he left. Naruto was Chunin level at best. No, he knew all too well that once Konoha found out Naruto was alive, and they would, eventually, the next few months after would probably be the most difficult of Naruto's life, if he was still alive at the end of them. Kisame see into Itachi's thoughts, we could at least help him get stronger and teach him enough to survive. He said, it's 3 days to Hidden Sound if we move quickly, but we have all the time we need, so why not take 2 weeks and teach him a few tricks, then we go our separate ways after we're done in Sound and the council won't even need to know he exists. Itachi gave no response to Kisame's suggestion, but it didn't matter. They had both known he'd agree before the words had come out of his partner's mouth. It had been said once that if you looked at missing nin society as a whole, it functioned very much like a hidden village. Mission information was carried by rumors instead of scrolls, but there were definite ranks and the older nins often passed on their experience to the younger ones. Itachi now understood why that was. Not out of any particular like for Naruto personally, but because in looking at him, Itachi inevitably saw some part of himself. Bonus: physics of big-ass swords. Having a decent knowledge of rotational motion is a necessity for any decent swordsman. The first fact is that the distribution of mass is very important. The further the mass is from your body, the more energy needed to move the sword. But then enters the law of conservation of energy. Say you want to swing the sword around in a circle once, 360 degrees, in 1 second. And say that, if you hold the sword at the end of the handle and away from your body, it takes 5 units of energy to swing it. If you hold the sword at the top of the handle, near the hilt of the blade, and close to your body, it will only take 3 units of energy to move the sword around in a circle. But since energy can never be created or destroyed, under normal circumstances, if one were to start swinging the sword at arm's length, giving it 5 units of energy, and then pull the sword in close to your body, the swing will actually speed up to compensate. The opposite is also true. If you start a swing in close to your body then extend your arm, the speed of the strike will decrease. The next morning, Naruto was kicked awake at 5:30 and told that he had to get up and train. Kisame handed him Kubikiri and started dragging the still groggy Naruto out to a clearing. He then drew Samehada and started to explain. Okay, brat, listen up. Itachi and I don't think you're ready for this mission yet, so you're going to be getting a 2-week crash course on how to be a missing nin. Your mornings will be spent doing taijutsu and swordsmanship training with me, and your afternoons will be devoted to Itachi teaching you the more general skills you'll need to stay alive. With no more words, Kisame charged. Caught unaware, Naruto was fully awake as he tried to parry Kisame's first strike. Tried being the operative word. He was thrown backwards by the force of the blow. The next 2 hours were spent pretty much like that. Kisame attacked from somewhere, Naruto tried to block. It took 45 minutes for Naruto figured out that this was not strength, but creativity and instinct training. Naruto figured out early on that he could never overpower than Shark Man, but he found there were tricks he could use. After trying to deflect shuriken with his sword the way he would with a kunai the first few times, he realized that if he turned the sword sideways, it was wide enough to shield him completely. He also found that the best way to block Kisame's attacks was to counterattack. If they both charged each other at the same time, Kisame would lose the momentum advantage he had when Naruto was just standing there, waiting for the impact. Sometime around 7:30 they had breakfast. Kisame and Naruto had bacon and eggs, Itachi had orange pocky. Right after breakfast they were back to training, only this time Kisame was actually teaching. He took Naruto through the basics of holding and swinging a sword, and then taught him some basic routines to practice. Kisame felt this was very important, because he had seen some moments in their pre-breakfast practice where Naruto had pulled off a truly amazing block, only to be overpowered because he was holding the sword in the wrong place or at the wrong angle. By the time lunch rolled around, Naruto was exhausted. After lunch, Itachi replaced Kisame, took one look at him, and declared he needed new shoes. Naruto was still wearing his now rather beat-up impromptu sandals he had made from the remains of his boots. It was for this reason that Naruto found himself in a shoe store in the nearest town an hour later. Naruto had complained that it was a long run for shoes until Itachi mentioned that he sometimes ran for half a day to get his weekly pocky supply. Naruto blindly picked out a pair of boots, which Itachi carefully examined before nodding. Naruto paid for the shoes and they ran all the way back to camp. Naruto, now completely wiped, glared at Itachi across what he had now come to call the training field. Suddenly, without warning, the old Itachi was back, the one that used to give him nightmares. Naruto's body ceased to function as every part of him screamed for him to run, but he couldn't move. Just as quickly, the feeling was gone, and Naruto looked at Itachi in awe as the Sharingan user pulled out a stick of banana cream pocky and started to eat it. Today's lesson, Itachi said between bites, is for you to figure out what I just did. I'll repeat it as many times as you like. And he did just that. The first few times, Naruto was just as shocked and frozen as the first. But slowly, as the afternoon went on, he started to resist the feelings, and as he did, he started to notice little things. The way Itachi shifted his posture slightly. The way his eyes narrowed. The way he angled his head. The way his muscles tightened. The list went on and on until suddenly, Naruto's eyes widened in understanding. Itachi wasn't moving, but somehow. It's everything, Naruto said, you're changing everything. Itachi nodded slightly. Orochimaru calls this K-intent, he said, but what it really is the acculation of fear stimulus. Seeing the blank look in Naruto's eyes, Itachi tried to come up with another way to explain it. What do people do when you glare at them with your red eyes? Itachi asked. They get afraid. Naruto responded hesitantly. Exactly. And what do they do when you bare your fangs at them? Itachi asked again. They get more afraid, Naruto responded, wondering where this was going. Itachi continued on, right again. But, Naruto, we are a race that has huge numbers of instincts that we never need to use anymore, instincts left over from when we were primitive hunters. And there are over 100 more subtle movements that automatically set off a fear reaction in humans. Naruto felt a chill run down his back and Itachi continued on. I just shifted my weight as if I was going to attack, and I'm sure you felt some fear. Naruto nodded. So if I were to do 40 or 50 small motions at once, each of which triggered a small fear reaction, they would build up into a paralyzing terror. Naruto finished. Naruto thought about it for a moment, then grinned, exposing his fangs. Teach me. Naruto spent the rest of the day subjected to Itachi's fear stimulus, as it was explained that he couldn't learn the technique himself until he was fully able to resist its effect. Naruto had absolutely no energy by the time supper rolled around and went to bed especially early, as Kisam's smirk promised another 5:30 wake up. It was in this way that the first week passed, and at this time, both his teachers were impressed with his progress. He wasn't a genius by any means, but his incredible endurance and work ethic made up for it. In 6 days' time Naruto had learned the basics of handling his sword, and had refined and smoothed his motions. He had also learned 15 of the 36 fear stimulus Itachi was planning on teaching him. He had yet to successfully use them all together, but he was working on it. On the 7th day, it was time for Itachi to go shopping for food and pocky, and it was decided that Naruto would accompany him. On the way to town, Itachi started a conversation about dealing with clients as a missing nin. So say you find out that a client wants to meet you at a certain place and time, Itachi said, what do you do? Naruto thought for a moment. I'd send a clone, and watch from a distance, he said. Wrong. Itachi said firmly, don't you think hunter nins plan for that sort of thing? You should go yourself to meet the client, anything less would be insulting, but use at least 6 clones as sentries. You don't care if the hunter nins find you. If they are stronger than you, then you're doomed either way, because they will always find you eventually. You just always want to know when they're coming. It's also good to remember that if you are caught in a sting operation, whoever is posing as the client can be used as a hostage or human shield. Naruto absorbed all this information as they arrived in One. Itachi handed him a shopping list and disappeared to the snack store, leaving Naruto to get all the regular food. 2 hours later, both were done their respective tasks, but Itachi wanted to make one more stop. What do you mean? I need a new sword wrapping. Naruto growled. Your current one is too difficult to remove in combat and falls off too easily. Instead of one large piece of cloth that you fold around it, we're going to get you a long strip of cloth to wrap around it, much as Kisame does. Itachi replied calmly. 20 minutes later, Naruto was heading back to camp with a week's worth of groceries and 60 feet of what looked to him like bandages. The only reason he wasn't complaining more than he was that Itachi had paid. After arriving back at camp, things soon fell back into routine, and before Naruto knew it, 4 more days had passed and they were on their way to the hidden sound. During the 3-day trip, they planned and trained, spending every spare minute in preparation. They stopped a day from the sound as the last 12 hours of the journey Naruto would have to make alone for Itachi and Kisame to stay out of range of the sound's regular patrols. As they sat around the fire eating what would be their last meal together, each was reflecting on the past weeks. For Itachi and Kisame, it had been a unique opportunity not only to teach, but also to spend time with someone who wasn't afraid of them. Everywhere they walked, fear followed, no S-class criminals, not even Orochimaru had the aura of fear carried by Uchiha Itachi and Hoshigaki Kisame. But here was a boy who was not only immune to it, but also impressed by it. In his weeks with Itachi, Naruto had become quite adept with all 35 fear stimulus and could now simultaneously use 12 without screwing up. Both found themselves developing the same kind of relationship with the boy that they had with each other. They didn't necessarily like each other, but they accepted and tolerated each other. And for people like them, that was enough. Itachi looked up from his musings, laughing slightly at his own emotions. He was a man who had his own family, and here he was feeling an attachment, however slight, to a boy he had met only weeks before. But then again, he thought as he watched Kisame try to teach the boy to use his new bandage-like sword wrappings, how did someone define family? A large part of it was a feeling of belonging, which Itachi had never felt anywhere until he became Kisame's partner. So had the Uchiha clan really been his family? He was broken out of his thoughts again as Kisame and Naruto wrestled in a pile of tangled cloth. He smiled as he silently watched them. As the last of the fire was dying out, Naruto got ready to leave. He wanted to arrive at the sound at dawn. Kisame just nodded to him as Itachi handed him his bag. It had been a unanimous decision that any of them would deny to the graves what had happened over the last 2 weeks, so silence seemed appropriate. It would be unlikely that they would ever meet again. Naruto turned, and ran out of the camp. Halfway to the sound, he stopped for lunch and found a box of double chocolate Pocky in his bag. Naruto carefully approached the gates of the hidden sound. The gates were open and there was a small amount of traffic going in and out. Naruto waited for his turn and line, then approached the guard. "Who are you and what is your reason for being here?" the guard asked in a bored tone. "Fushiku Naruto is my name and I'm here to see a swordsmith about getting this." He gestured to the neatly wrapped kubikiri haucho on his back, fixed up. Naruto spoke without a shred of hesitation. He had practiced his speeches until he knew them backwards and forwards. The guard looked at him curiously. "Village of origin." "Missed," Naruto replied. "Equivalent rank, Chunin." "Time since you left your village." 1.5 years. The guard appeared satisfied and waved him through. Naruto entered the village with his heart pounding. The last question hadn't been one they'd rehearsed. The next few moments were some of the most anticlimactic of Naruto's life. Hidden sound looked like, well, a village. He wasn't sure what he had been expecting, but this wasn't it. With the exception of the slightly more rough around the edges look the sound had, it could have been Konoha. Naruto just wandered around for a few minutes, basking in all that was the village of the hidden sound, but he soon remembered that he had a mission, and one that was very dependent on timing. After a few minutes of asking around, he was pointed in the right direction and found himself in front of a house. The nameplate of the door read, Kiran, but it didn't look like a shop of any kind. Then he saw smoke coming from the backyard. He jumped over the fence and his face blanched. There was no way this person could be anyone other than Kisam's brother. There couldn't be many people in the world that looked so shark-like. He appeared to be pounding on a red-hot hunk of metal, but Naruto didn't see any fire. He observed the man for another minute or two, watched him dunk the metal into a bucket of water, and suddenly his hands were forming seals. Naruto watched in interest. Suddenly the man spoke, "Gukakyu no Jutsu." He called as he breathed a flame that engulfed the metal. Naruto nodded to himself. Definitely the right guy. Naruto jumped back over the fence and knocked on it. He heard grumbling for a moment before Kiran opened the gate, looking annoyed, and glanced down at Naruto and more pointedly at the wrapped sword on his back. "What do you want, brat?" Naruto grinned. He had more in common with his brother than his looks. Naruto tried to sound professional. "I have a repair job for you, one probably better discussed in private." Kiran looked at him suspiciously, but let him in and closed the gate. He walked to the back door of the house and opened it, gesturing Naruto to go inside. Once they were comfortably seated in Kiran's rather boring living room, Naruto took the sword off his back and with a flick of his thumb, it had taken hours to master the knot that held the bindings, the cloth fell off. Back in Konoha, everyone was on edge. With the attack force leaving in 6 days for the sound, kunais were being nervously sharpened all over the village. The Sand siblings sat nervously in their assigned room. Shortly after Tsunde's announcement, the Sand had sent him a message telling him not to bother coming back, and that the Sand was going to send 170 nins to support the Konoha attack on the Sound. No one missed the irony of this act. The role the 3 siblings had been given was containment. They were each given a squad of Chunin and their task would be to patrol the forest and make sure no one important escaped from the chaos that would be the hidden Sound. At this precise moment, Gaara was feeling out of place. Not because he was a demon, or a murderer, but because he had nothing to polish. Kankuro was carefully wiping down Karasu, and Temari was buffing her fan with a dry sponge. And all this time, Gaara just sat there, doing nothing. Temari looked at her brother oddly. He had been staring at her hand buffing her fan for about 5 minutes now. It wasn't helping her nerves. She had been in wars before, but this time she was in charge of a group of Chunin, and most of them were from the Leaf. She knew she had the lazy ass and his team under her command, but hadn't really heard much else. Leadership was a responsibility she wasn't sure she wanted. It was more suited to Gaara, with his unshakable calm. Temari spotted a scuff mark and buffed furiously. She supposed all she could hope was that nobody dangerous tried to get past her section of forest. Far away, Kiran was in shock. "Kubikiri Haucho," he whispered, as if afraid it would disappear. He reached out to touch it, and after getting an acknowledging nod from Naruto, he picked it up and examined it. Where did you get this? Kiran asked. Naruto had practiced this too. I was part of Zabuza's group, and am now the only one left alive. I've started to use the sword myself but needed it repaired. Kiran looked at him carefully. Do you know how to handle it? Naruto nodded. I've been practicing since Zabuza D, and I like to think I'm proficient. More importantly, how much for you to fix it? Kiran shook his head. I can't be charged for fixing it. The sword isn't broken, it was just never finished. Naruto's eyes widened as Kiran continued. I was driven out of Hidden Mist before I could finish it. I had heard it had been given to Zabuza the demon, who had also later fled, but I never dreamed I'd see it again. He looked up at Naruto. I don't want any money, it would be my greatest pleasure to finish the sword, but first I need to see you handle it. Naruto would realize later that showing Kiran routines Kisame had taught him probably wasn't a good idea, but Kiran never noticed. It was imperative to the mission that no one, not even Kiran himself, ever find out Naruto had been working with the Akatsuki, so Naruto knew he'd have to be more careful. Kiran nodded after a few minutes of Naruto showing off but then caught the boy off guard. Okay, so you're good up close, how good is your aim? Naruto blinked. Aim. When you throw it, Kiran looked exasperated. Naruto blinked again. He felt really stupid. After all, the first time he had seen the sword it had been flying in the air over his head. Kiran sighed. The boy had shown he could handle the sword. Okay. New condition, Kiran declared. I will finish the sword, but after you have to learn how to make use of its full potential, otherwise, you're wasting it, and I won't allow that. Naruto nodded. It was better than he had hoped for. He found out that it would take 5 days of solid work to finish Kubakiri Haucho, and that, until then, Kiran was to be left alone. This left Naruto with 5 days of spare time. He had never had that much spare time before. The first thing he did was find a ramen stand and order 12 bowls, but after that, finding himself with nothing else to do, Naruto decided to train. He found a sound training field and joined those already there. He tried practicing Kirigakure no Jutsu once, then switched to Taijutsu when everyone else on the field glared at him and the mist he was making. He threw himself into training for the next 5 days, fighting to become as strong as he knew he needed to be if he wanted to survive. In Konoha, shinobi were doing much the same, preparing for a war. On the 5th day, Naruto went back to Kiran's shop, and the man himself walked out holding a cloth-wrapped bundle. In Konoha, Tsunade strode up to a podium and faced her troops. Though hundreds of miles apart, and in very different tones of voice, the swordsmith and Hokage spoke in almost perfect synchronization. It's time for you to show me what you've got. Kiran let the cloth fall loose and smirked at Naruto's reaction. The sword looked mostly the same physically, but the blade had been stained with something to make it dark, almost black, and unreflective. It somehow made the sword look more sinister. Naruto reached out to touch it but Kiran stopped him. Before you so much as touch this sword, Kiran said, you have to understand what it is. It has changed in many more ways than what you can see. Do you know why the 7 Mist Tenkan are called that? Why they are called Heavenly Swords? Naruto shook his head. Because, Kiran continued, they are more than just swords, that is why they are given names, after all. Each Tenkan is forged using a number of forbidden jutsus that allow it to contain a bit of its wielder's essence, and its powers reflect that. My brother's same had a can smell and eat chakra, showing our family's rather shark-like personalities. Kiran grinned, showing his pointed teeth, then continued, quickly becoming serious again. But it also means that taking up one of the Tenkan is a lifelong commitment. The sword is part of you until the day you die. Zabuza never had that connection with his sword because the jutsus needed were never done, but you need to understand what you're getting into. Are you sure you still want to go through with this? Naruto thought back to his time with the blade over the last couple of months, how it had started to feel like an extension of his body, and smirked at Kiran. The sword is already a part of me, Naruto said, so it's only fair that I give it some of myself. Kiran nodded and carefully passed the sword to Naruto. Now, I'm not sure what's going to happen when we do this, Kiran said, most of the Tenkan start looking something like that. He gestured to Kubakiri, when my brother did the bee ritual, his sword grew scales. Naruto raised an eyebrow but let Kiran continue. First of all, Kiran instructed, you need to carefully slit both your wrists with a kunai. Naruto nervously took out a kunai and did so. The bee ran freely. Now, Kiran continued, hold the sword upside down with both hands so your bee runs down the blade, and with the handle still between your hands, copy the hand seals I show you. Naruto did so, and as he finished and held the last seal, he felt an odd burning in his belly and looked down to see his seal spinning furiously, exactly as it had done with the Shikifujin Kai. Suddenly, he felt the chakra sucked back into his body, but he watched as the outer two seals on his stomach disappeared, leaving only the spiral seal. Naruto panicked for a moment, then took a deep breath and felt inside his body. He was pleasantly surprised to find the Kyuubi's chakra still sealed, exactly where it was supposed to be. But there was something missing, and he felt an odd tugging at the back of his mind. Hearing Kiran gasp slightly, he came back to the real world and had his breath stolen from him. The dark blade was now engraved, in the most precise detail, with the image of a red nine-tailed fox locked in combat with a deep blue dragon. A moment later, the name inscribed near the handle started to shift, the kanji twisting and reforming to read Sere Kirit, Spirit Sea. As he sat there on the ground, he felt a feeling of confusion emanate from the sword and burst out in hysterical laughter. The sword had taken part of him, but it had also taken the soul of the Kyuubi. 15 minutes and a hell of a lot of explaining later, Kiran was nodding his head. When he thought about it, it made perfect sense. The jutsu was designed to take part of a person's soul, and no matter how powerful the seal, the Kyuubi's soul would be far less attached than Naruto's own, so the jutsu had taken it. This left Kyuubi's chakra inside Naruto, still happily mixing with the help of the remaining spiral seal, as well as a confused demon fox inside the sword. That was another thing Naruto found odd. He could vaguely feel what the fox was feeling and thinking. Currently, said fox was very off balance. For years he had been in that cage, able to feel all his chakra but perceive nothing. Now, he could feel things around him, but drawing on chakra was like drinking the ocean through a straw. His feeling wasn't a form of sight exactly, just a perception of things nearby. He also found that he had a somewhat empathic connection to the brat. Naruto was sitting on the floor of Kiran's living room when he felt it, a slight pull on his chakra, and realized the fox was trying to draw on it from inside the sword. Curious, he loosened his chakra control and let the fox take some. The sword started to flicker with a red glow. Kiran walked back into the room to see Naruto holding the sword, which was surrounded by a fluctuating red aura. He sat down on the couch and observed the boy. Kiran had never seen a situation like this before and was fascinated. Further experimentation revealed that the Kyuubi, if given enough chakra, could manifest parts of his body. This resulted in no small number of nicks and gashes on Naruto, as the fox was still just a little irked about the arm-severing incident. It was this, however, that led directly to the next discovery. Naruto could not only control how much chakra the fox got, he could use his own chakra to manifest. Nothing as complex as what the Kyuubi could manage. After all, Naruto had to his own body he had to worry about controlling. But he soon found he could send a small burst of chakra from the sword. Kiran suddenly broke the silence. Now I get it, he exclaimed. Naruto was about to ask what Kiran got but didn't have time as the shark man just kept speaking. What was it you said before the ritual? That you felt the sword was part of your body. That's the power of your sword, to exude chakra from it as if it were a part of your body. But Kyuubi complicated things. That also explains the engraving. The red nine-tailed fox is obvious, but the blue dragon represents your chakra. Kiran rushed on, now completely lost in his own world. The two creatures in the engraving are fighting, but they're also intertwined, much as you must be. Therefore, your essence is mixed with the demons, and that's what's holding Kyuubi's soul in the sword. Naruto looked cautiously at Kiran. Meaning, Kiran said, sounding proud of himself, that the only reason Kyuubi still exists now that he's apart from his chakra is because he is, in the literal sense, now part of you. You aren't two separate beings anymore, you're one being with two minds and two chakras. As amazingly comforted as Naruto was by this thought, it meant that the fox would have to think twice before killing him, and that was a good thing. Kiran continued to speak, completely oblivious to the mood. Now that that's over with, it's time for a sword-throwing lesson, he said with a grin. Naruto glared. He added a few fear stimuli for extra effect. Or, Kiran continued, we could start the lesson first thing tomorrow morning. Naruto nodded. He needed some time alone with his sword. Once Kiran was out of the room, Naruto gave Kyuubi enough chakra for the demon to manifest ahead. Naruto tried to play it cool, as if he had conversations with glowing red fox heads coming out of his sword every day. Well, brat, the demon said, this certainly is an interesting twist. It changes little, Naruto replied, you still need me to stay alive, and since I know how much you look forward to dying, I figure you'll contribute to my well-being no matter how much you hate me. Kyuubi laughed, yes, I suppose that's true. And I have to admit, this form allows me a great deal more freedom than that cage your belly and. Naruto see him off, before anything, let's get one thing straight. We hate each other, correct? The fox head nodded with a feral grin. But you need me to give you access to chakra or you're about as useful as Sakura. The fox flinched, that had been harsh. But I'm stuck with you either way. So here's how things work. You help me fight, which you love to do anyway, and in return, I'll give you chakra. The only rule is that if you ever hurt someone without what I think is a valid reason, I'll see you off forever. Do we understand each other? I suppose, the demon said with just a hint of annoyance. He was stuck with the brat, so he would just take the opportunities to reap destruction as they came. 14 years in a cage had taught him some patience. Naruto sighed and collapsed on the floor as the head vanished. It was only supper time and he was exhausted. The evening was uneventful and the next morning, Naruto was up bright and early, getting ready for his throwing lesson. Kiran led him out of the hidden sound and into the forest, where he found a tree he liked, took Naruto to a spot 140 feet away, and told him to try and see the tree in half. Naruto failed miserably the first few times, missing the tree or just nicking it, but on the 9th try, he felt that familiar tug that meant Sereikirat, or more specifically Kyuubi, wanted chakra. He gave the sword some chakra as he released the throw and the sword not only see through the tree perfectly, it also curved around and returned to Naruto's hand. He grinned. The demon could control it using chakra. Kiran was taken slightly aback. Okay then, I guess it's on to lesson 2. Lesson 2 was learning the Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, a skill Kiran claimed was necessary. Due to his experience with the regular variant, applying it to a weapon wasn't very hard and Naruto picked it up quickly. The only thing was that Naruto called it the Kirat Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, since he claimed calling his sword a shuriken was insulting. The rest of the morning revealed that Kyuubi could control 9 swords at once, the original and 8 shadow clones, all of which he delightedly used to reduce a rather large section of the forest to stumps. By 3 o'clock, Kiran was out of things to teach, he wasn't really a ninja after all, and declared that Naruto could go. Naruto rushed back town. The operation would start in 4 days and he needed to be ready. The plan he had concocted with the 2 Akatsuki was simple. Naruto was going to invade the sound. Not for real of course, but enough confusion would be generated and destruction caused that Hoshigaki Kiran's death would be easily overlooked. The problem had been how to make Naruto look like an invading army, but with careful planning, they had come up with an idea that would work and that, over the next 3 days, Naruto started to put into effect. The first thing he did was pose as a simple workman carrying a bag of fertilizer. What no one noticed was that the bag had a hole, and everywhere he walked some fell out. What people didn't know was that there was gunpowder in the bag, not fertilizer. Kiran lived near the south gate, and Naruto, over the course of almost 2 days, had enough gunpowder just laying everywhere in the area like dust that the slightest spark would cause some to ignite, but people just passed it off as lighter malfunctions. He switched from workman to repairman and spent the last day setting up shuriken launchers on the tops of houses so that, when triggered, they would shoot the kunai into the air and make them fall in the street looking as though they had been thrown over the houses. Right before going to sleep the night before the mission, Naruto sat and thought, making sure he hadn't missed a part of the plan. The next morning he would wake up at dawn and start his mock attack an hour later. Naruto was going to instigate his invasion using as many shadow clones as he could make, all using henge to look like various leaf nins. Kisame and Itachi would disguise themselves as sound nins and remove Kiran from his house before torching it. They weren't planning on being in the village more than 15 minutes. 8.5 hours from the sound, Kisame detected what felt like a very large number of approaching chakra sources and quickly woke his partner. 9 hours from the sound, Temari led her advance team. The job was to cover the north gate, so they would have to travel around the whole village to get to their positions, and they had to do it without alerting any sound sentries. 9.5 hours from the hidden sound, soon it was leading the main invasion force. They would rest a short while, an hour from the village, and attack at dawn. Half an hour before dawn, Naruto was knocked off of Kiran's couch, where he had been sleeping, to see Kisame and Itachi above him, disguised and looking like sound nins. He glanced at the clock. What's wrong? A leaf invasion force will be here in 10 minutes. Itachi said, as if talking about the weather. Naruto looked confused for a moment. A real one? Itachi nodded. Shit. Naruto muttered, this will be a pain, won't it? Itachi nodded again. Kisame left to wake his brother and Naruto got off the couch and started to dress as he talked, so we'll have to fight our way out. Which way? Itachi thought for a moment. North. Assuming that you have everything set up for our plan, the first fire jutsu used in this area of town will light this place up, so we need to get out of the south end before the leaf arrive in. Itachi calmly pulled out a stick of strawberry pocky as he checked his watch. 7 minutes. Kisame ran back into the room, carrying a rather annoyed Kiran over his shoulder. Kiran's eyes widened as he saw Naruto with Itachi, but he quickly understood. All three ran out the back and leapt onto the roof. Hidden sound was in chaos, people running everywhere making last-minute defense preparations. All three moved their hands through seals and for one instant, every eye in hidden sound was facing in the direction as together, they called, Kirigako no Jutsu. The mist started to form. Between the three of them, there had been more chakra put into the mist than was required to summon 8 Gamabunters, and soon, all of hidden sound and surrounding area was enshrouded with it. Kisame set his brother down and he and Naruto, in somewhat creepy synchronization, drew their swords and flicked off their wrappings. Both Akatsuki raised their eyebrows at Naruto's black engraved blade, but decided to question Kiran later. Naruto reached into his pocket, and carefully tied on his forehead protector, taking time to run his hands over the kanji he had scratched in all those weeks ago. He could feel Sere Kirit pulse with excitement as he looked out into the mist. Without a word, Itachi picked up Kiran and the 3 shinobi dove into the fog. They ran north silently, each already knowing what they would need to do. At the north gate, Itachi and Kisame would break right and Naruto would continue on. There would be a containment unit of shinobi to stop them from doing exactly what they were doing, and it would be Naruto's responsibility to distract them. There could be no knowledge of Akatsuki, and with the leaf being the attackers, the danger of discovery was even more than usual. They got to the north gate without trouble. Everyone else was heading south to fight. Just as they were arriving, they saw and heard a huge explosion on the south side of town. Both armies would be completely confused at this point. As expected, Naruto watched as Itachi took a sharp right turn just outside the gate. Naruto stopped atop the gate and looked out into the mist-filled forest. Everything he had done since he left his village was for this moment, to look out over what would soon be a battlefield not as a Konoha Genin or even as a Konoha Nukenin, but as Fushaku Naruto. His face widened into a dark grin. Then again, he thought, to his opponents, he would be nothing more than a demonic mirage. Akamai Kichuji looked cautiously into the mist. He had used his multi-size no jutsu as soon as this unnatural fog had rolled in. Less than 40 feet away, Naruto was cursing silently. He knew it was soft, but he really didn't want to K those few people who had been relatively nice to him. He hefted the eager sword and sent it a clear message. No K unless Naruto said so. The sword pulsed in his hand and he pulled back his arm and threw. Chuji felt something coming and dove out of the way as it flew past him. It had looked like a huge sword. He was immediately on full alert, looking for something, anything, that would reveal his opponent's location. The large man managed to let out a yell before he fell to his knees and passed out, returning to his normal size. Naruto was already running past him to the next opponent. He knew the leaf containment unit formation, he had practiced it many times himself. Yamanaka Ino knew nothing. Naruto was less than 5 feet away from her and she couldn't sense him. He circled her until he was behind her, and calmly, with a shallow S. Now there was only one more. This was where he was going to take a risk, but he really didn't want the 3D. He jumped to where the third member should be posted, and as expected, he suddenly felt his body freeze. He knew Shikamaru was somewhere in the mist. He had been sure the genius would find some way to catch him in a shadow bind even without seeing him. This was where it became dangerous. He sent a pulse of chakra to the sword. It sent back a feeling of understanding. He opened the floodgates, pouring demonic chakra into the blade. The blade's aura turned into a giant claw that shot off into the darkness. Naruto heard a grunt and the shadow bind was released. Now came the run like hell part. Every shinobi within 3 miles would have felt that manifesting took an insane amount of chakra, even by Kyuubi's standards. An investigation team would be there in minutes. He hoped it would be from the leaf. But there was one problem. Naruto didn't know it, but he had only practiced containment operations with 3 people because that's how many were on his team. In the field, it was custom to have a 4th member, farther out. It was for this reason that it caught Naruto rather off guard when a hurricane force wind blasted him up against a tree. He quickly recovered, but found himself in a now missless clearing facing someone he immediately knew he would lose to. Between the huge Kirigakure no Jutsu and the Kyuubi's manifestation, he was drained of chakra. But more important was that despite the fact that he didn't even remember her name, he couldn't hurt Gaara's sister, he owed far too much to the sleepless boy. Temari was bringing her fan around for a second blast when her bee froze. As Itachi had taught him, Naruto did not force it, he simply allowed his body to flow into what the Sharingan master had called the death stance. Naruto recognized it as what Orochimaru had used in the forest, a collection of fear stimulus that gave the target a paralyzing terror and a feeling of their impending doom. She had seen him, and was working with the leaf, he couldn't afford to let her tell anyone about him. His death stance wasn't very strong yet, and would start to wear off after just a few seconds. Naruto made a decision, he had no time now, he would think of something later. Temari fought to regain control of her body. Logically, she knew she was helpless like this, but the fear was still too strong. Suddenly, Naruto sprung into action, crossing the clearing of trees between them in less than 3 seconds. The last thing Temari saw was a set of demonic eyes burning into her own. Naruto tossed the unconscious girl over his shoulder and glanced back at the mayhem behind him one last time before running as fast as he could into the forest. Long since forgotten, the remains of Naruto's bag lay in the smoldering pile of wood that had once been Kiran's house, where in a few short hours, a certain long-haired Hyuga would notice a necklace glinting in the sunlight. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.